So I'd like to talk to you a little bit today to do some discourse analysis with The Economist, one of my favorite platforms to use to talk about and think about analyzing discourse, because of course The Economist is so beautifully crafted, well-researched, rehearsed. It's just as a platform, it's very good. But as you'll see, it's also very problematic in how it looks at and talks about power. It's often very implicit. I've talked in other videos about the ways that it uses subtle language, and you'll see in this article how it uses, for example, very happy language. In the article, I'm going to talk about gun control, which is going to go to something quite controversial. And they use quite happy language to talk about the gun control side, their advocates and what they're doing and their progress. On the other side, typically they speak about particularly the current presidency, Obama, because they're always quite conservative, no matter who is in party. So now, so-called liberal from their perspective is in the administration, so they're very anti-Obama. I find this very problematic because it's very implicit. They never really say this, but in this such article, and let's just go through it, you'll see how they're very linear, logical, and very solid logic that they provide here really convinces you that this is the epistemic truth. Like, this is what you need to know about gun control. And I find that problematic for several ways, even though it's well crafted and linearly presented so people really get what they're saying. It's often duplicitous. You'll often find on the very next page sometimes, especially when they're covering America, and they cover a social issue, and then they have to cover Mr. Obama about something economic. And they're very conservative economically, but then they're very liberal socially. So one of my favorites is the issue where they looked at prisons in America, and they looked at how racist it was, and they said the feds have to step in. And this was a few years ago, before all the shootings now, where they take the same sort of side. The feds have to step in, the feds need to do this. The very next page, economic news. Oh my God, the feds are too much, the feds are stepping in, and all this, that, and the other. And the way that they speak about them so disparagingly in both instances really works to undermine both their objectiveness and their aim to be objective, and both they're just not being objective, which I think is something that's worthy of pointing out. And I think it's actually wrong, but I think that if we can critically view the news, we can still read The Economist and gain what it has to say and respond to them and make them respond to such claims. So in this article, first off, they say that 90% of Americans support gun control, and they say that on one of the recent votes that they were talking about to expand gun control, well, 285 Republicans were on one side and 7 Dems were on the other, and yet they never out this as a partisan issue. They never once even say that it's partisan, other than sort of blandly reporting that, in this one instance where it came to a vote, this is how the cards laid. And so then they go on to describe in detail the NRA's position. Now, again, they open this by saying that there was another heinous, school shooting in America, and they give you the blood and the gore of it. Not the blood and the gore, but they give you the details of how many students were lost in these sort of heinous crimes. And we'll get back to that, of why these choice issues are important, because the other choice issue that they choose to highlight when in explaining the NRA's position, objectively, quite linearly though, they explain that, the NRA is advocating because they feel abused because people are having to give their details when they want to get on a plane and they want to carry a gun, especially if they go abroad. And so the state might be infringing upon them and all this. And so they're just reporting about what the NRA is saying. So they move on to the next issue, and they give, as you might expect, they give a gun control advocate, expert in a sense, a campaign, not comparable obviously to the NRA, and they don't say that, especially in terms of fund and influence. They later imply in the NRA's influence, but they say that basically nothing's being done, and so the NRA is really being effective. So they really confirm this narrative, and then they go on to even talk about this, and this is where I said the happy language. Well, the NRA's Republicans are enjoying sweeping wins in states and they're achieving their goals, and gun lovers are, doing this and then the other. And even though, young children are starting to shoot each other, it's not the gun lovers. And so they really, in this very implicit way, start to distance themselves, these heinous, other crimes of the others versus these gun-loving people. All the while, as I said, because they're presenting this in a very linear way, now they've prioritized the NRA's position. So they've given sort of they intro by giving a sort of heinous, school shooting. But then they just go on to explain, well, the NRA says this. And they go on and on and on. And then they get on this NRA tip of how successful the NRA is. And you're over halfway through the article. This is what's interesting when I say that this is done implicitly, because now you look at the experts and the groups that they use to confirm that this is really the case that they're reporting. So now they have lined up a set of NRA experts, Republican victories to confirm that, wow, this is really happening. Of course, the article is about gun control is winning, but they're not in any way questioning it. They're, in a sense, as they would say, objectively reporting about it. And so objectively, of course, none of their articles have actual bylines by definition. And so the people that they go on to talk about all these different anonymous forces. Some people say this, others say that. Some would like to argue that, controls should go further or they should not go further. But the ultimate message is that guns are winning. Guns are winning. And they even go so far as to say, give you another heinous instance, talk about guns on campuses. Well, people arguing about more guns, they say, the NRA, on campuses. But look, what about if a girl were raped? So they take this instance, well, girls are raped, now arm the girls so that they won't get raped. And they just go on just reporting about this, and at no point do they question this. Now, in true Economist form, they use the last closing, paragraph to state their moral position. So they do suggest that there is a further, deeper question there that comes from all this reporting. And then every time I read this, I always say, but they should have started there. So finally they say, the answer, to why this is so difficult. This is their critical view. This is what this whole article has been about, that they've unearthed, something that's going on in this argument. The answer is that background checks are tools of the state and trust, and the state has plunged in the past decade, notably on the right, where it blends with loathing for Obama. Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's charismatic frontman, told conservative crowds in February that when criminals attack or wives, sisters, and daughters face assault through a kicked down door, laws can't protect you. You're on your own. So they give priority and even closing to those kind of voices. They never question what this loathing about Obama is about. How effective is this loathing of Obama? How do they use it to gather people, galvanize people, voters in other ways? How, most notably, in the same journal, you'll see articles about gay marriage and how this is used as in the very same way as a splinter issue. But because of this linearness, you don't ever get to see the true impact of these issues that they're reporting on. And then what about that? Why is it that in the same journal they can report about Ferguson and all the protests, and even though they whenever they report subsequently about Ferguson, they refer to the riots after Ferguson, and they rarely talk about the protest unless and only if they're talking about the protest? Why is it that they never cross these issues? And it's the same question that everyone asks of Wayne LaPierre. You can talk about your gun rights all you want, but what about what about these urban youth? What about these black men who are being shot down even as they're fleeing, unarmed, clearly no threat? An older man is Walter Scott, the latest case as of April 21st. So they don't ask these sorts of questions, and Wayne LaPierre never gets these sorts of questions asked of him. And so, the journal can take this weird objective approach, but they're not objective. They're subjectively prioritize Wayne LaPierre's position. Why? I can only venture is to say why. I can see the effect that it does, because when you look at the pattern, it simply goes to say that, distances these heinous social issues from Republicans and conservatives, yet support them economically and never question how, the two managed to have this liaison between, social conservatives and economic conservatives. And this is why, movements like the Occupy movement are growing, and the 99% movement, I would say more broadly, are growing. The concept of a 99% is that actually that link between these social conservatives and these economic conservatives is being weakened, is being questioned. And so even though you have these staunch, magazines like The Economist that don't allow, their format itself doesn't allow for one to question, to ask those other sorts of questions, to even see, well, how does this story on this page relate to the story on this page? Because they often are quite informative, even about these issues we're talking about. Like I said earlier about Obama and the prison rights. They're great for reporting about that. They've been reporting that now, and how that Ferguson, fizzled out, they say. But at least, they got proof that by an expert in the Department of Justice that people are being exploited, and those tickets and fees that people are paying are actually supporting the municipal court. So they actually can ultimately get to some of that kind of critique, but it comes very slow. Well, they really hide the issues about they've not even said in this health issue, clearly guns, they're not even identified those who are at greatest risk of losing their lives. And that's a basic sort of question. Who is at greatest risk of losing their lives? They're suggesting, is it just random kids in elementary schools? Well, that's what they've suggested. But we actually know that's not the case. And that's why I think it's very dangerous that they are so duplicitous in this way. And that's why I do encourage you to read it, but I do encourage you to read with an oppositional gaze.
Yes, child, you be blessed. You got it going for you.